I'm Magnus Linklater. On my left is Sarah Smith, Scotland editor of the BBC. Far right, James Naughtie, special correspondent of the BBC. And on my immediate right, Steve Richards, journalist, broadcaster, and for the purposes of today, author of this brilliant book, The Prime Ministers, which is a study of the prime ministers of the modern generation. And it sparks really the theme that we thought we would try and address today, which is the theme of leadership. Because in his conclusion, Steve, having run through prime ministers from Harold Wilson to Theresa May, says we have a crisis of leadership. And so my first question is, what do you mean by that? And is there, do we have to redefine the term leadership for the modern era?
Yeah, I think that in the book, all but the last two prime ministers I cover were substantial figures. They had epic flaws of a Shakespearean quality, but they were all developed politically by the time they became prime minister. They all had very different experiences there. Some who I think had the greatest depth had traumatic periods in number 10. Heath and Brown, I think, are two of the deeper modern prime ministers, and they had traumatic times, but all of them had big qualities and arrived in the job having been tested in all kinds of different ways. Something odd and dangerous has happened in Westminster politics, where the bar for leadership has been set suddenly very low. I remember one person who ended up as a candidate for the Labour leadership did one interview on Newsnight, and a few people tweeted, she did very well on Newsnight, perhaps she could be the next leader of the Labour Party. One interview. Now, some of these people, as I say, flawed. Wilson, huge background before he became leader, many deep experiences which framed his leadership. Heath, the same, and on to Blair and Brown. Cameron had been a shadow education secretary for a few months before he became leader. And Theresa May, though a senior cabinet minister, untested in many of the skills of leadership. So something has happened. And Corbyn, famously a backbench MP until he became leader, the equivalent of playing tennis in the park and being told to go to the centre court at Wimbledon. So at a point of epic national emergency, I think there is a lack of big figures in Westminster politics.
But Sarah, do you think there is a danger of that we look back and we think, look at these great figures of the past, and the puny present leaders don't measure up to them? Is that just nostalgia, or is Steve right that they had a kind of certain depth of experience that...
Well, I wonder if some of it is a different view of deference. And I'm not saying, and you know, we were all working journalists, certainly throughout the premierships of most of these prime ministers. I think the first prime minister I interviewed was John Major. I'm sure the other two go further back. There are have even greater experience.
You can say that again, yeah.
It's a low blow. Cut you out of future questions.
It depends, of course, on... I mean, Barack Obama had as little experience as David Cameron, practically. He'd been a senator for 2 years. He hadn't sat in a committee. He hadn't even been, you know, the equivalent of a shadow education minister. It can be quite easy when you don't like a prime minister to dismiss them. But there's also something else happening. This is a very controversial view, and I'm kind of putting it out there rather than saying it's absolutely what I believe. But that what has been happening when you look at Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn, Donald Trump, you can say this is a crisis of leadership, or you can say it is a change in the way in which we are selecting our leaders, which is more populist. Now, populist can be a very dirty word, because some populists, use and frankly nasty racism in order to attract popularity to their politics. But in its purest sense, that more people get a say in who gets to lead us, and that's how Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, because more people than ever before participated in a vote to choose him to do so, and we are electing politicians who appeal to the widest number of people they can in the country by saying, we'll give you what you want, not what we think you should have. Maybe we just need to think differently about what leadership is in this era.
So Jim, is it a difference, Sarah suggests, in the way we select leaders, but also a difference in the way in which leaders communicate to the wider public, social media?
It's certainly a difference in the way we elect leaders. Jeremy Corbyn would never have become leader of the Labour Party if he hadn't laid out, if Eric Joyce, Major Eric Joyce, as he used to be called, the member for Falkirk East, hadn't laid out Andrew Bridgen, the right-wing Conservative MP, on the floor of the Strangers' Bar. And Eric Joyce, of course, had a problem because when he had a couple, he would do this in Heathrow and post offices and various shops around the country. Unfortunately, he did it in the Strangers' Bar and the police had to be called. And unfortunately, it then became public. There was then an attempt by the Unite Union at the Grangemouth plant to fix the selection. Ed Miliband panicked, which he was prone to do, and introduced a £3 membership. If Eric Joyce hadn't laid out Bridgen on the floor of the Strangers' Bar, Corbyn would never have been, Prime Minister, leader of the opposition. So things happen that are rather peculiar. I'm not somebody who says, Roy Jenkins and Dennis Healey and Tony Crosland and Ted Heath were the greatest men that we've ever seen. I think they were all hugely influential and talented and thoughtful figures. But I essentially, although I don't want to go too far down that road, agree with Steve that there has been a falling away. What struck me during the Theresa May years was that I had left presenting the Today programme in 2015, so I wasn't kind of on having to face these people across microphone morning after morning. I just could not believe the lack of respect that her cabinet colleagues had for her. I mean, they thought she was completely useless. I mean, let's just be clear about this. That is what they thought. They thought she was narrow-minded, dogged, perfectly decent, perfectly reasonable. Of course, she would deal with people with propriety, but as a Prime Minister, pretty hopeless. The referendum campaign that Cameron ran in 2016, from the point of view of the Conservative Party, it's difficult to remind yourself of this. The Conservative Party was a Remain party in that election 3 years ago, in that referendum. A Remain party. It is hard to think of a more incompetent campaign that was run by David Cameron, except the one run by Corbyn, where he went off on holiday in the middle of the referendum. And I'm afraid that the grip has gone on parties. Now, I'm not in favour of Stalinist leadership, although Seamus Milne is, but that's another matter. Or maybe Leninist. Anyway, we could debate this for quite a long time. What I have absolutely no doubt about is that Steve is quite right, and it's a wonderful book, by the way, when he talks about the bigness of these people. Now, if you look at Thatcher and Blair, who are two towering figures of the 20th century, without any question, they both had, you can argue about it, but they both probably had flaws. They had some policy decisions that were very, very difficult to reverse. And, Blair in Iraq, Thatcher in the miners' strike and various other things, the poll tax, which Nigel Lawson told her was mad at the beginning. She didn't believe him. He was right. She was wrong. But she was a huge figure. So was Blair. Steve makes an eloquent case for Brown and Heath, both of whom came unstuck for various reasons. These were big people, and they were bigger, in my view, unquestionably, than the people who followed them.
Steve, you just following up on Theresa May, said she learnt the wrong lessons about how to lead. What were the lessons she failed to learn?
She did everything the wrong way round. Jim mentions the degree of disdain towards her in the cabinet, and that was true, but not at the very beginning. often with prime ministers, they come into power and they could do virtually what they wanted. And at the beginning, it's easy to forget, she had a honeymoon to die for. And during that period, the cabinet were quite scared of her. She gave them that steely stare, didn't say very much, but she was 20 points ahead in the polls.
And that first speech outside Downing Street was a great success.
The first speech, written by an interesting figure, the advisor Nick Timothy, some say who was a combination of Enoch Powell and Ed Miliband, a curious...
You said the place is falling down. And there was
just the mention of Theresa May and things start falling, you know. But at the beginning, she had space. But as is often the case with prime ministers when they have space, with the exception of Thatcher, she didn't realise it and became trapped into what was quite a hard Brexit very early on. Do you remember the red lines from very early on? Actually, at the beginning, she had the space to tell her party, we have got a compromise on this. We might have to work with other parties. And they weren't going to remove her. They just had a wacky leadership contest. They weren't going to have another.
Yeah.
She chose to do the exact opposite. And then, when she was weak, she had no choice but to become assertive. So towards the end, her last speech, she talked about the need for compromise. It was too late. She was too weak. She had lost everything. So she misread the political stage, and many of them, she's by no means the only one who did that. But in terms of Brexit, she did have a bit of room at the beginning to tell her party what it didn't want to hear. By the time she started to tell them, she was doomed. And that applies in different ways to some of these other prime ministers.
Sarah, she was subjected to a kind of vilification in public, which I can't remember, perhaps Steve will correct me here, any prime minister being subjected to. That
John
was
Major? Major after
but
after
it was
Maastricht?
pretty sustained and very, very personal in Theresa May's case, wasn't it?
It was, although, I mean, Steve's right to remind us of the amazing honeymoon she had and how many points ahead she was at the time. And I remember a kind of collective sigh of relief across the nation that the grown-up had taken charge of this. And even people who really didn't want to leave the European Union thought, well, at least it'll be managed in some kind of proper, professional, serious kind of a way because somebody who knows what they are doing is here. I'm afraid, no, I agree. I think all of her mistakes were of her own making. There was no need to make that Lancaster House speech and put in place red lines that she couldn't meet. There was no attempt at reaching out to any other parties either to build a coalition. If she knew there was a certain number of Tory votes she could never rely on and that she was going to face down the ERG, she could have met other political parties or other, at least members of other political parties to put something together. Made no attempt to do so, and I'm afraid, actually, the briefings against her that came from within her own party were of her own making. I mean, I know you may be attempting to suggest it was because she was a woman, she got a harder time. I think she brought it on her own head, I'm afraid.
Is that because, Steve, you make quite a point in looking at different prime ministers about how they rely on advisors and people who are there, to support them. Is that because she lost those two advisors, and was she then thrown back on her own resources? Was there nobody there to help her?
I think she was one of the loneliest figures in that job after the election. I mean, when you think about it, what she had to do would, to many human beings, be almost impossible. She was wholly reliant on two special advisors, especially this Nick Timothy figure, who gave her ideas and a theoretical governing purpose. And instead of, she didn't just have to sort of be indifferent to them, she had to sack them both after the election. Now, that 24 hours, if you think about it, she unexpectedly didn't win a majority. She then had to sack her advisors. Must have been painful. After which she was fairly isolated. She had people around her. She couldn't engage with people. A common characteristic of quite a few of them, actually. But yeah, I think after that she was a largely lost figure, but a lost figure, like all of them, who couldn't let go of power. Even towards the last week, I'm told, when she announced her resignation, she was trying to find a way of hanging on. One of the constant factors of all of them is that in the end, they were all miserable, but none of them wanted to give it up.
But the one...
And she was like that.
But Steve, the one, fascinatingly, who got it right was, of all people, Wilson.
Yes, absolutely.
16th of March, or whatever it was.
Yes.
And as Sarah points out, I am the old man of the sea. And anyway, very lovingly, but I mean, there we go. But Wilson, during the recent embroglio with Corbyn, or one of the most recent ones, Joe Haynes, known to certainly to us, who's now about 103, but who was Wilson's amanuensis. I mean, he was Nick Timothy to Wilson.
Yes.
And Joe Haynes and Bernard Donahue, who worked for Wilson in Downing Street, and indeed, in Bernard's case, Callaghan as well, wrote a letter to the FT about a month ago, re-Corbyn, saying the reason that Wilson decided to go in March 76, which has been the subject of all sort of conspiracy rubbish, was, in their view, that he realized, whether it was because of the shadow of approaching illness, which he perhaps sensed, he had dementia of some form in his latter 3 or 4 years, he decided he would go because he realized he was no longer up to the job. And it was a very telling remark, because David Cameron went because he'd just blown it up. I mean, he'd screwed the referendum, so he had to go. She went because she'd run out of friends. Neither of them went because they decided, I've lost it. I can no longer do this at the level that I want to do it. Wilson would have been a don at Jesus College, Oxford in the 40s, had worked for some of the great reforming figures of the 40s, had been right at the top of his game, knew he could no longer do it. So he went.
Yeah.
Cameron just had to go because he'd blown it. And in my view, he blew it because of arrogance. He blew it because he thought I talk to him a lot in these days, as in my professional role. In the 2014 Scottish referendum, he believed that he and George Osborne had fixed it with their arguments about the economy, and there'll be different views about that here, but it's true that they won it on that basis. Cameron thought, we just do it again and we win. Now, Osborne disagreed with him fundamentally, told him he shouldn't have a referendum. He didn't need to have in terms of the manifesto. For goodness sake, circumstances change. He could have got away with that. It would have been 2 weeks mayhem and he would have been fine. But Cameron was arrogant enough, well, it's a hard word, but I think he just believed his own propaganda, and he thought, we can do it. And he did not understand the boiling anger that was there, which was exploited very successfully by people who took another view. And it was enough to win, although they didn't believe. Nigel Lawson told me 2 days before the vote he didn't think they had a chance of winning. But nonetheless, they won. And I think it was a fatal bit of, well, I won't say Old Etonian arrogance, because it's not confined to that school.
Interrupting briefly.
Although it does seem to have a... I'm sorry, Magnus, but it does seem to have a...
Sarah, let's come back to this business of populism. We've talked about, the new era of social media and the way politicians communicate, but is it also because of a collapse of confidence in the traditional party system and the way that parties... Scotland is the best example of that. The complete collapse in an incredibly short time of Labour in Scotland, and the stunning success of the SNP, based, perhaps on the fact that we just lost faith in the old system.
Possibly. So there's a lot in that. And first of all, you're talking about the way in which politicians communicate. And one of the fascinating things, of course, at the moment, with both our Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, is they won't do proper broadcast interviews.
Yeah.
They won't come on the Today programme, they won't go on Newsnight, Channel 4 News, any of these places, because they think they can talk directly to voters via Facebook. And there was Boris Johnson did one 2 weeks ago with questions that had been chosen by Number 10, sent in by real members of the public, but he asked them. And of course, there's no ability to follow up, which is the key thing. You can ask that man any question you want, and he'll give you bluff and bluster. What you need to be able to do is to come in with a rejoinder and say, but that's not true. Prime Minister, what about this? And you can't do that on a Facebook Live. And so all the main broadcasters decided not to put any of this out on the TV because it wasn't a rigorous journalistic exercise. And it's every bit as difficult to get Jeremy Corbyn into a studio to submit him to a proper rigorous interview. But that message probably got to almost as many people on Facebook as it would have done if it had been on the PM programme on Radio 4 or on Channel 4 News. So they may be able to communicate in an unfiltered fashion, which will madden Jim, Steve and I, because, you know, we think it's an important part of democracy that we get to ask them questions. It also gives us something to do all day. But they genuinely may not need us anymore in order to do that.
But surely the point...
Jim,
exactly.
I just want to pick up on that business of communication. We've talked about Theresa May. We've now got a Prime Minister who is an ace communicator in his own eccentric fashion. This is the missing chapter in your book, Boris Johnson. Does he fill the gap at all in terms of experience, or is he just somebody who is a larger-than-life character and therefore fits perfectly into this scenario?
More the latter. See, I'm not even sure that he is a great communicator. If he was, I think he would do the Today programme.
Yeah.
It was interesting, when I wrote that book, the long-serving prime ministers could all, in their different ways, frame an argument. And it's a constant factor with the long-serving ones. Thatcher, if you remember, defined monetarism as my father never spent more than he earned in his Grantham shop, and a nation can't either. Now, it was economic illiteracy, but very accessible economic illiteracy. Wilson used to reduce everything. He used to just say, if you vote Labour, your butter will come down in price. So people say, oh, that. He reduced their whole economic policy to cheaper butter.
A very good imitation, by the way.
Very good.
Blair, he used wit as well. I was thinking when Johnson sacked ruthlessly half the cabinet he inherited, Corbyn popped up with a soundbite, and I can't remember what he said. And it reminded me that when Macmillan sacked a load of ministers in the night of the Long Knives, Wilson, then leader of the opposition, popped up and said, the Prime Minister has sacked half his cabinet, the wrong half. And kind of, you know,
like
immediately in a different place.
I remember Ted Heath once saying to me, I had one woman in my cabinet, one too many.
So they were communicators. Now, Boris Johnson, he's a phrase maker, like the columnist he is. He's a phrase maker. But I can't recall him framing an argument about why no deal Brexit could be a sort of paradise that we can all look forward to. And I incidentally can't remember Farage, who they're also frightened of in the Tory party, framing arguments. I mean, clearly he's, you know, I hear him on his LBC show, and the toughest phone call he gets is, Nigel, there's only one person who can save the United Kingdom, and Farage says, who's that? Bill from Kent? You, Nigel. And that's the level of the interrogation he gets. I'm not sure they have chosen a great communicator. As to whether he breaks all the assumptions you make about leadership, it's really too early to tell, but I doubt it.
Well, communication is one aspect of it, and I agree with everything you've just said. But historical awareness and understanding is another. I mean, I, for very obscure reasons, was reading Macmillan's diaries the other day for 62, 63. And de Gaulle's veto on our application to join the common market in 1963 was vetoed by him in January of that year, the year in which Macmillan finally had to resign, for health and all the rest of it. And if you read Macmillan's reflections on his discussions with the French and others, but principally with the French, which of course Heath was deeply involved in as the main negotiator, as the Deputy Foreign Secretary, in effect, Lord Privy Seal. Macmillan talks about it in a deeply historical way, about the tides of history, about what Churchill had said in Zurich in 1946, about where this country would be as empire turned into Commonwealth, which was done, with some appalling exceptions along the way, in an extraordinarily peaceful way over, let's say, 15 years. And Macmillan was thinking, as the last Prime Minister to experience the Great War, in big terms. And when you look at the current generation of leaders and how they express things, if you hear Jeremy Corbyn talking about the United States, for example, it is, I've got to watch my language here, but it's a kind of 1970s student politics agit-prop demonstration. And if you listen to what Boris Johnson, admittedly a biographer of Churchill, I mean, it's quite a good read. But there seems to be, to be a lack of largeness and awareness and depth and spread in the argument. And when we argue about communications, they think communicating well isn't explaining the background and the depth of the complexity of an argument. It's making a soundbite, and that is the difficulty.
Now, Sarah, Steve makes, to me, rather surprising, slightly throwaway line about two Scottish figures. He says that Scotland has produced two formidable leaders, that's his expression, Nicola Sturgeon and Ruth Davidson. A, do you agree? And B, is it a bit early to judge?
Well, so, yeah, we could add a few others to the list. Donald Dewar, Robin Coop, John Smith. Sorry, cheap shot, Steve. But no, but interesting. Of those who are currently serving, it is a very interesting question. Nicola Sturgeon, it seems to me, when viewed from south of the border, and I have this conversation with colleagues and friends who are based in England, principally in London, all the time. They think that she is an astonishing politician who enjoys unparalleled success and popularity. Now, she's been in office for a long time. You can't take that away from her. There haven't been any real disasters during her time in office. Has she achieved what she said she was going to? Has she gotten rid of the attainment gap in Scottish education? It's narrowing very, very slightly. It's nothing really to crow about. The NHS has far more funds going into it than south of the border. You could claim that a success. Is it performing? I mean, it has about 25% more funding than you get in England and Wales. Is it 25% better? Arguably not. What is the great achievement she can point to? Plus, you look at a situation where she had an astonishing honeymoon, obviously, when she came in as leader and became First Minister immediately after the referendum, went on to a huge general election victory. 56 out of the 59 seats in Scotland went SNP. And since then, there has been a great decline. Only once, 3 weeks ago, has there been a poll that said more people were going to vote for independence than to stay as part of the Union. It still wasn't quite 50% of the population, and it was in response to Boris Johnson having become Prime Minister, essentially, not anything Nicola Sturgeon has done. So if she was that terrific, why are we not polling at 60% of people wanting to be independent to leave a United Kingdom which is not being led perfectly, shall we say, from Westminster? And Ruth Davidson, who is charming, who's an excellent phrase maker, who is very, very good at connecting with people and has had success in reinvigorating the Conservative Party. They've overtaken the Labour Party in terms of votes and representation in Scotland. 13 MPs is more than many of us thought we would see for a long time. But she's never been in office of any kind at all. She is a popular leader who's going to have a lot of problems now dealing with Boris Johnson, who's done very little in order to try and create good relations there. Doesn't have a whip over all of her MPs either, some of whom are fully fledged Brexiteers. So you'll start to see a splintering in her group of MPs. And I would say maybe she would be a great Prime Minister, maybe she would be a great First Minister, who knows? But we have seen nothing in her political career to tell us that.
A quick question for all of you, just to give me a relatively quick answer to. Do you think the election of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister makes independence in Scotland a more likely proposition?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't think it is relevant, and it's going to sound like a completely bizarre thing to say, but let me explain. So, as we were just talking about the polls vis-a-vis independence, there was a spike in favour of independence immediately after the Brexit referendum in 2016, and again in the last couple of weeks as Boris Johnson has become Prime Minister. So you can see that people's sentiment in the middle of a kind of dramatic period in time, there are lots of people who say, oh, the hell with this, I'm just going to vote yes. The next time there's a referendum, I'm just going to vote yes. And then 6 months later, once the heat's gone out of it, they seem to sort of drift back into the no camp. And we just don't have an absolutely solid over 50% majority in this country yet. When the referendum comes, and I do believe there will be another one, it will be when we know what Brexit looks like, because we have to. We cannot have a vote where we don't know what the status quo is, what we're choosing between an independent future and what Brexit is like. So it will be when things have calmed down. There's lots of technical reasons why it can't be before 2021, but principally it won't be until things are a bit more settled. And when things are settled, people are less likely to say, the hell with it, let's just vote yes.
Well, Sarah, just one very briefly, Magnus. There's an assumption there. I mean, I understand exactly the point you're making, and I have some sympathy with it. But I just don't see things calming down. Now, I'm one of these people that thinks it's very, very difficult for Johnson to have an election before Christmas for all kinds of... We can get into endless arguments about 21 days and all the rest of it. I think it's extremely difficult. If he gets a deal rather than drops out with no deal on 31st, that will involve betraying a large chunk of the Conservative Party at Westminster on the question of the backstop. Now, he's betrayed a lot of people over his life, politically and personally. So, there would be nothing strange about that. But it would be very, very difficult. And whatever it produces, it will not be a period of calm. And I don't know what you two think, but or indeed you, Magnus, I would not be surprised. I'm not saying it's likely, but I'm saying it's possible that at the next general election, you don't have a single Conservative MP or Labour MP from Scotland. Now, in those circumstances, Westminster would have to deliver a second referendum. And I just know a lot of people, and we all have anecdotage, to hand in this tent. I just know an awful lot of people who would have gone to the wall to vote no in 2014, who are now swithering. And that's the only reason I say it's more likely. I don't say
we all know those people,
at all,
I'm sure many of them are here, but I don't think that's the response to Boris Johnson necessarily. That's the situation we find ourselves in. If we do go, say we're it's not going to happen this side of the 2021 Holyrood elections, that's for sure. So say we have a vote in 2022, 23, some point around about then. Either we have Brexited in whatever form, and it's okay, it's not the catastrophe that some people fear, in which case few of those people might think, you know what, this United Kingdom thing, it's not as bad as we feared it might be. Or it's an economic disaster, in which case it is very easy to make an argument which says, you know what, cutting yourself off from your nearest and largest trading bloc is economic suicide. So why would Scotland do that?
Right, I'm going to exercise Chairman's prerogative here because...
We're only getting
20 minutes. I know, I can sense that. There's only 20 minutes to go, and the audience. But just before asking for questions to the audience, this is not necessarily a representative cross-section, but hands up in the audience, anyone who, as a result of Boris as Prime Minister and the real possibility of a no-deal exit, no-deal Brexit, might be inclined to vote yes this time.
Having voted no last time, you mean?
Yeah, all right, well, we'll subdivide the question, but actually it's quite an interesting... just keep your hands up for the moment. That's very interesting. It's almost half, almost 50-50. And just
so
one...
Can we ask a different question?
Yeah,
who now would vote differently than they did in 2014?
Yeah, see, that's interesting.
Quite a lot.
Quite a lot. Right. Questions from the audience.
How many of you think a no-deal Brexit will happen?
Excuse me. I knew this was going to happen. I'm chairing this. Thank you. Right.
Total arrogance.
We're going to take questions. There's a question here and a question at the back, and then we'll come first here. And if you could keep your questions as short as possible.
I want to try and get some influence on the electorate. And I think I'd ask the panel to put their gaze on the electorate. Because, yes, we've got a disaster in terms of prime ministers, and they probably consolidated the problem as well. But the electoral base has changed as well. And how do you see that developing in terms of people have lost confidence in the political classes? Where is that going to lead us? And therefore, it's not just one-dimensional, it's down to good leadership, good communication. It's about people's confidence that what they vote for is actually going to get half a chance of being achieved.
Do you mean, Brett, confidence in the system?
I think what I've heard from the platform basically is the nature of the political classes and prime minister leadership, blah, 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 blah. But they don't work in isolation. They've still got to come to an electorate, and all those points that you mentioned about communication, leadership come into play. But we've changed as well. We've changed as well. And how's that going to affect the future political
Hang on, I'm going to ask Steve to Steve first.
Well, I'm going to partly disagree with you about that. I think there is a tendency amongst voters, by the way, by no means in this current situation, but throughout the time span, certainly of that book, to see betrayal at every possible moment amongst these leaders. And although we have been critical, I think not unfairly and not in some nostalgic way with the current crop, this juxtaposition of the elite versus the people, or what Dominic Cummings plans the next election campaign to be, Parliament versus the people, is really dangerous. Because when you think about it, it is the people who elected MPs to the Parliament. Yeah. So, but these terms are used all the time. And I don't think that although there are issues about the competence and weightiness of these figures, that there is a sort of casual indifference to the voters. Almost the opposite. There is a weakness. New Labour used to be called desperately arrogant, but in some ways, my view of New Labour was it was never arrogant enough. They read the focus groups and
exactly.
My God, have you seen this? Oh, yeah, these opinion polls called Mono Peter.
Exactly.
A constant fear of the voters. Cameron was very similar, and it leads to a weakness which ironically then makes voters feel betrayed. But I think, so I don't entirely share your view, that while I agree with you that's what voters feel, it's by no means unique. They have felt it in the 60s, 70s, etc.
A question at the back, towards the back there.
Quite right.
Would you agree that this is mainly an English crisis and the union has been disregarded south of the border, and the implications for the union, particularly in Scotland and most notably in Northern Ireland, have been completely a surprise to those in Westminster who had never, ever even thought about it or considered it. It seems to me that this is an English crisis and it's a unionist crisis, and that's where we're at now. They're having to dismantle the union.
Jim.
Well, if it is an English crisis, it's a crisis for all of us because we're all affected. And of course, one of the aspects, I want to attach an adjective to it, of Trump's view of the world is that interconnected problems simply don't exist or shouldn't be allowed to exist. They should be expunged. All the multilateral trade arrangements, all the defense arrangements, all the assumptions about working together and that dread word consensus should be dispensed with. And one of the difficulties about the atmosphere of current politics, which has been led by Trump, and I should say just in brackets, don't forget that a year from November, there may be, I'm not saying there will be, there may be a change of power in the United States. I mean, Trump could be history in 15 months' time. Personally, I think it's slightly more likely than not. But, of course, I would never say that Trump couldn't be re-elected, having spent my time saying he could never be elected in the first place. It would be a very stupid thing to say. But, you know, you're absolutely right in your starting point that the ignorance, historically, I come back actually to vaguely the point I made earlier, particularly about Northern Ireland, is absolutely extraordinary. I met somebody in Northern Ireland 6 weeks ago. I was talking about something else, actually. We got on inevitably the subject of the border. We'd said that he'd been at something with Jacob Rees-Mogg in London. And Rees-Mogg said, well, I don't need to visit the Irish border. Somebody suggested you should come and see, 300 miles and, the number of crossing points and how long it takes and the number of people who go 10 times a day across the border, and the kids who are, across the border to go to school and all the rest of it. And he said, well, I don't need to go because I know the history. I've read 19th century history. I understand the border perfectly well. Well, I mean, I was at a conference in Belfast 18 months ago, and somebody stood up and said, this Brexit thing, I was chairing some conference at the University of Ulster, said the Brexit thing is very simple on the border, right? He said, first of all, who holds the 7 constituencies from Derry right round to the Irish Sea on the border? Duh. Sinn Féin, of course they do. So the questioner said, if you put any infrastructure in, we're not talking necessarily about towers with cameras on top, but any infrastructure at all. First of all, who could you get to build them? How long would they survive? And how many British soldiers would be needed to protect them?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the fundamental question.
Yeah.
And anybody who's in Northern Ireland, on either side of the divide, at a serious political level, which excludes many of the elected representatives in Northern Ireland, understands this absolutely fundamentally. And not to get that, not to realise how wafer thin. I mean, I was in Derry just after the awful murder, of Lena McKee. And people saying, look, there are 200-300 guys out there who just can't wait to get back in the streets. And the idea they don't have guns is absurd. I mean, they can get them on eBay. And they're just waiting. And on the other side as well. And these people sort of talk about, well, there's no real problem in Northern Ireland. There is a huge problem. And people who don't understand the Scottish situation in similar terms, I mean, I find it mind-boggling. And how it works out, I don't know. But the people who bang on about the union and don't have the faintest idea about the post-devolution developments in Scotland, to some extent, to a much lesser extent in Wales, and particularly in Northern Ireland, are, I'm afraid, contemptible in politics. They've got to get their heads around this stuff. Because if you don't understand that, you can't solve it. I'm sorry I'm getting away.
And then somebody in the front row.
Thank you all. Sarah referred to the changing view or levels of deference. We've all been laughing at moments during this, and yet we're in a juggernaut about to go over probably one of the most critical precipices this nation will ever face. You've referred to the style and types of leadership. That it's lacking is too self-evident for words. My question is, in an era where MPs, MSPs have usually climbed the greasy pole of intern, research worker, never done employment in the outside world, never created employment for other people, never sustained employment for other people, how do we inculcate the leadership which is really needed? And how does civil society take a lead in really pushing and leading?
Steve.
To be honest, I'm not sure what the answer is. Having made this assessment, I'm not clear how, in what way you produce big figures. And because I can't answer it, I'm going to answer something else in 10 seconds, which is, if I said in that book, Scotland have only produced 2 leaders, I will have to rewrite it because that's completely...
I don't think you said only.
Oh, right, I was going to say, because I've mentioned Gordon Brown, big figure. As Sarah knows, John Smith, a big figure, and many others. So I hope I didn't say that. And I agree with Sarah that Ruth Davidson is untested. And in a way is an example of a low bar because, she goes on Ma and cracks a joke and George Osborne pops up and says she should be the next Prime Minister. She has still to be tested. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, you say Scotland has produced some formidable leaders, including Nicola Sturgeon, and although untested by power, Ruth Davidson. Okay. So you're off the hook there.
Can I just come in on this point about where do we get the leaders we need from? I'm afraid I don't have the answer to that. But part of the question is those people are not going into politics, and that's because of what you were talking about in terms of how your relationship between voters and politicians has changed. It's the manner of the discourse has completely changed. I certainly wouldn't want to stand for election and put myself forward in this climate. And something has to be done to get the right people into the places where they can be in the first place.
Look, the rough stuff on social media puts a lot of people off. And that's extremely regrettable, and I have no idea how you solve that. But one of the problems, one of the answers to the questioner here, which is tied up with the question we've just heard, is that the way you encourage people to get into politics is to have some people whom they admire, who are there now. So if you have, leadership at whatever level, not necessarily just at Prime Minister, leader of the opposition level, but people who inspire some loyalty, not in kind of ghastly personal ways, but can inspire people. That is the way you change the political culture. So the lack of leadership is absolutely tied up with the lack of confidence between, and we know that the mob can be stirred up now more easily than ever before because of social media. That means leadership is ever more important, and that's why it's so regrettable that it's not.
And so do you think there aren't any of them? I mean, with the leaders of the parties, I think we've all agreed on, are not necessarily the most impressive we could have come across. Admirable, I'd ask you, into that category could fall Yvette Cooper, Dominic Grieve, Jess
And what have they got in
Phillips.
common? They're not either in the government or on the Labour front bench.
But it doesn't mean that they're not important, that these people are
of
not
course.
involved in
No, I
politics,
agree.
whom people could have some admiration.
The question is, do they have the guts to do what's necessary in the next 6 months?
Question down here.
A question on leadership in two parts. One is, do you agree that the most likely way to allow Brexit either to be stopped or revisited is a caretaker government? And if that is the case, is the central impediment to that persuading Jeremy Corbyn not to have his being the caretaker PM be the sine qua non of that? And if that's the case, what sort of leadership has to be exercised to persuade him that is in all of our interests, that he does the statesmanly thing and step aside and allow that to happen?
Phew. I don't know if you can ask if any member of the panel can answer that in precisely 60 seconds.
I think Steve
Hold
can.
up your hand.
Yes.
Let me, in 1 minute, say that I think is not the route that the hard Brexit will be stopped. There is a route, and as Jim said, they've all got to show the courage to do it. This is the frustration for those of us, I'm allowed to say it, against a no-deal Brexit. There's a majority in that House of Commons to stop it. But as quite a few MPs are saying to me, what is the mechanism? And I think the mechanism that they can unite around is taking executive control of the House of Commons and forming legislation. And there are lawyers working on this as we sit here, which is bomb-proof, that instructs the Prime Minister to seek a 6-month extension. And that's what I think this disparate group of flaky rebels are working on. They won't. Jeremy Corbyn, in fairness to him, no one could accuse him of pursuing personal ambition throughout his career. So I don't think he particularly wants to be Prime Minister, actually. But
Exactly.
the mechanism isn't there to deliver a government in 2 weeks, I suspect. So they won't. I mean, he might try a vote of confidence. If he does, I think he will lose it. But this alternative route, I think, is viable if they all are at the top of their game. Dominic Grieve, Yvette Cooper, and many others. I'm told the figure leading it is Oliver Letwin, which is a slightly worrying element to all of this. But the figures are there. So if they fail, it would be a terrible failure of duty from their perspective. But I think that's the mechanism they will use.
And that requires the Speaker. Doesn't the Speaker
He will do
play?
everything he can to assist it.
That is absolutely the case.
Everything. Just one last, I think that's true. The idea of asking Jeremy Corbyn to do the statesman-like thing is a tautological question. It will not happen. If there were a stroke of lightning and something else happened, then the whole landscape would be different. I won't say it would be bathed in a rosy glow, but it would be very, very different. Steve is absolutely right. That is the way. Now, we've got a conundrum here which consists of two, I don't know, what dumbbells on either side of it. One is that Jeremy Corbyn probably doesn't really want to be Prime Minister. I mean, he would never admit that in 100 years. But I cannot imagine he dreams of waking up in the morning with a red box and the Cabinet Secretary. You said, you've got 6 horrible decisions to make before 10 o'clock. It's just not on. The second thing is, does Boris Johnson really want a no-deal Brexit? Now, you put those two in the mix, and how it works out in the next 8 weeks, nobody has any idea. But I think what Steve says about people having been working on this for, at least 15 months is absolutely true, and some of them are very bright people.
Unfortunately, we can't take any more questions. I was told 10 minutes ago that we had 5 minutes to go, so we've overrun now by about 10 minutes. So alas, we cannot go on. I hope you'll agree, however, that we've A, been entertained, B, learnt a lot, and 3, if you would please join me in thanking our distinguished panel.
Thank you.